Imagine, somewhere in the vastness of the Russian Empire, under skies heavy with clouds, in a world bound by rigid traditions and silent laws, a young woman stands at the threshold of the unknown. She is only 17, but her gaze carries something unsettling, something ancient, a fire that does not belong to this world, a thirst that no book, no priest, no teacher has been able to quench. Her name is Helena Petrovna Blavatsky. Her crime? A forbidden hunger, a relentless desire to uncover what was meant to remain hidden, to lift the veils, not only of religion, not only of science, but of reality itself. And her sentence was exile, not one imposed by kings or by courts, but by the very fabric of society. A sentence whispered in every corner of her existence: do not question, do not search, obey. But though some souls are not meant to obey, some are not born to fit within the narrow boundaries of the ordinary. Some are born to destroy those boundaries and walk beyond them. On a night that history forgot, with no witness, no farewell, Helena disappears quietly, completely, as if swallowed by the shadows of the unknown. But what seems like a disappearance is, in truth, a beginning. She leaves behind everything: her family, her name, her status, even the safety of the world she was raised to accept. She steps beyond the edges of the known, into a world that most would not dare to imagine exists. A world where whispers are louder than words, where symbols speak clearer than language, and where the invisible is more real than anything the eyes can see. But where did she go? Who did she meet in the hidden chambers of forgotten temples, in the shadowed alleys of cities lost to time, or in the silent mountains that touch the sky? And more, what or who was truly guiding her steps? For she would later claim that this journey was not entirely hers, that someone or something had been calling her, watching her, preparing her since childhood. An invisible hand leading her across continents, through dangers, mysteries, and revelations that would shake the foundation of everything we think we know. This is not just the story of a runaway girl. This is the first step in a path that defies time, space, and reality itself. A journey from which there would be no return. And now, the question is not just where she went, but whether this same calling echoes still, beyond the veil, into the ears of those willing to listen. Long before the world would come to know her name, Helena was already a mystery. From her earliest memories, there was something different, something otherworldly. While other children played, laughed, and lived safely within the walls of their innocence, Helena wandered between worlds, between this and something else. Her dreams were not dreams. They were messages, echoes of voices without faces, symbols that burned themselves into her mind, visions of places she had never seen, but knew with a certainty that defied explanation. And then there was him. She spoke of him often, a figure, tall, majestic, draped in flowing white robes, with a turban wound tightly around his head, and eyes that seemed to blaze like living fire. He would appear, always, when danger crept too close, when fear tried to claim her, when the shadows of the world grew heavy. He never spoke with words. His presence alone was command, protection, guidance. But who was he? Was he a ghost? A guardian? A figment of an overactive imagination, or a being far older, far wiser than any the world was prepared to understand? The family whispered. At first, they dismissed it. A child's fantasy. A phase. But as the years passed, the whispers grew darker. Concern became discomfort. Discomfort became fear. In the world of 19th century aristocratic Russia, there were expectations, strict, inflexible. A young woman was not meant to dream of invisible guardians. She was meant to marry, to bear children, to play her role, quietly, within the gears of society's grand machine. But Helena was not made for that machine. Her spirit, wild, untamed, burned against the cold, polished walls of the life prepared for her. She was not subtle in her rebellion. She read voraciously, not the approved tales of romance or etiquette, but forbidden texts, histories of lost civilizations, myths of gods who walked among men, accounts of mystics, magicians, and travelers who had crossed the threshold between the seen and the unseen. By the age of 16, her questions had already become dangerous. Not dangerous in the way of weapons, but in the way of ideas. Ideas that spread, infect, awaken. And nothing is more dangerous to a society built on obedience than a mind that refuses to bow. Her family, increasingly desperate to contain her, reached for the oldest solution known to every patriarchal system: marriage. A cage disguised as duty, a contract wrapped in gold. Nikifor Vasilyevich Blavatsky, a man nearly 3 decades her senior, stern, conventional, emotionally distant, a bureaucrat, a judge, a servant of the empire. In every sense of the word, the perfect match for someone who needed to be tamed. The arrangement was swift. Helena objected, loudly, furiously. But in that world, a young woman's voice weighed less than the paper her marriage contract was written on. Her cries were dismissed as hysteria, her resistance framed as immaturity. And so, one day in 1849, against her will, against every fiber of her being, Helena Petrovna became Madame Blavatsky. A title she would carry for the rest of her life, but not as they intended. To the eyes of the world, it was done. She was now a wife, her future secured, her wildness contained. But what they could not understand, was that Helena's spirit was forged from something far older, far more unbreakable than any law written by men. She would later describe that day, that marriage, with words sharper than any blade. A grotesque mistake, she called it, a mockery of fate. And yet, perhaps it was fate itself that orchestrated the entire farce. For if that golden cage had not been forced upon her, would she have ever found the strength, the fury, to tear it all down? In the weeks that followed, the reality of her imprisonment grew suffocating. The walls closed in. The roles imposed upon her became chains, the emptiness of a life mapped by others, pressed like a weight upon her chest. She watched the days pass, each one identical to the last, smiles painted over hollow rituals, conversations that meant nothing, expectations as heavy as the winter snow, and twice as cold. And then, the dreams returned. But this time, different, urgent. The figure, the man in white, no longer a passive observer. His presence now, a summons, a calling, a command that vibrated not through sound, but through the marrow of her bones. Go now. The message was clear. The time for questions had ended. The time for action had begun. One night, as the house slept, Helena stood before a mirror. She stared not at her reflection, but through it, into something beyond. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the sheer magnitude of what she was about to do. There would be no farewell, no explanations, no letters left behind, because how does one explain the unexplainable? How does one tell those anchored to the earth that they are leaving for the stars? She gathered only what was necessary, a few coins, a change of clothes, and the one thing that no hand could ever take from her, the fire, burning within. And as the first light of dawn crept over the frozen horizon, she slipped away, silent, invisible, gone. To the family, it was scandal, an unthinkable disgrace, a wife abandoning her husband, a daughter defying the sacred order of things. The rumors spread like wildfire, each more fevered than the last. But none of them knew the truth. This was not an escape, but a beginning. Helena had broken free from the golden cage, but where the world saw shame, ruin, disaster, the hidden forces that watched from the shadows saw something very different. A gate had just opened, and the girl who refused to kneel was about to step into a realm where the laws of men held no power and the mysteries of the cosmos waited to be unveiled. What lay ahead was not merely adventure. It was a crucible, a trial of spirit, mind, and body, a descent into the hidden architecture of reality itself. And standing somewhere in the distance, half in light, half in shadow, was him, waiting, as he always had. It began with silence, a silence so dense, so absolute, it felt as though the entire world held its breath. No farewells, no witnesses, no footsteps echoing down marble halls, just disappearance. In the dead of night, Helena slipped through the cracks of a reality that no longer held her. She carried nothing more than a small satchel, a few coins, a forged sense of determination, and a purpose that even she did not yet fully understand. A runaway wife to the eyes of the world, yes, but the truth about it was something far more unsettling, far more dangerous. This saga was not the rebellion of a disgruntled girl. It was a calling, a command, from somewhere beyond. The whispers that had haunted her dreams, the visions, the mysterious man in white, all of it had led to this moment, a singular point, where the map of her life was burned and replaced by nothing. Because the road ahead was not written, not by kings, not by priests, not by the architects of polite society. The road ahead was carved by something unseen. Her first steps led her south, toward Constantinople, the ancient city where east and west tangled like vines, where empires had risen and crumbled, and where secrets moved, unseen, beneath the surface of ordinary life. It was there, amidst the labyrinth of bazaars and shadowed corridors, that Helena tasted, for the first time, what it meant to live beyond the veil of the ordinary. Gone were the gilded salons of Russian nobility, the suffocating expectations, the heavy chains of obedience. In their place, uncertainty, risk, freedom, wrapped in danger. For the first time, the fire within her was not a curse but a compass. She traveled under false names, adopted new identities as easily as one changes clothing. A Russian countess here, a governess there, a scholar, a traveler, a seeker. But beneath every mask, the same relentless question echoed. Where? Where was he leading her? What was she meant to find? From Constantinople, her journey spiraled outward. Greece, Egypt, the Middle East, ports and deserts, temples forgotten by time. She followed whispers, fragments, rumors of knowledge long buried, of schools hidden from the profane world, of masters who guarded the sacred keys of existence. The clues were never obvious. A glance exchanged with a stranger, a phrase overheard in a forgotten dialect, a symbol carved into a doorway, invisible to anyone who did not know how to truly see. And always and just beyond reach was the presence, him, the man in white, sometimes in dreams, sometimes on the edges of waking reality, appearing not to comfort, but to push her further, to remind her this was no ordinary journey. There were dangers, of course, thieves, swindlers, disease, the perpetual threat that came with being a lone woman moving across continents in an age where women were expected to remain silent and invisible. But somehow, again and again, when peril closed in, the impossible would happen. A sudden change in the wind, a stranger offering help at the exact moment it was needed, a boat delayed, just long enough to avoid disaster. Accidents that were not accidents. Coincidence or the unseen hand guiding every step? In Cairo, she found the first real glimpse of what she was chasing. There, among the crumbling stones and forbidden sects, she met mystics, adepts, keepers of fragments of ancient knowledge. But even they spoke in half-truths. "You are not ready," they said. "The path you seek lies further, higher, deeper." It was not enough. Helena was beginning to understand something terrifying, that the deeper one walks into the labyrinth of the esoteric, the more the labyrinth changes, the destination moves. The answers dissolve into new questions. The key leads not to a door, but to another riddle. But still, she pressed forward. From Egypt to Syria to India to the remote mountain paths that few outsiders had ever walked, and fewer survived. Along the way, strange patterns began to emerge. Patterns that felt orchestrated. People appeared in her life, not by chance, but as if placed there by design, by a Sufi mystic who taught her the language of symbols, a Greek sailor who spoke of hidden monasteries in Tibet, a dying merchant who gifted her an ancient manuscript filled with diagrams and codes, pointing to places that did not exist on any conventional map. And then there were the letters, notes left for her in places no one should have known she would be, notes written in a hand she did not recognize, but whose message was clear. Keep going. You are watched. You are protected. She began to suspect that she was no longer simply searching, but being led. By whom? By what? It was in these endless travels that the line between the material and the immaterial began to blur. She would later recount episodes where time seemed to fracture, where hours vanished, where footsteps echoed in corridors that did not exist, where voices spoke, but no mouth moved. Illusion, madness, or the first cracks in the veil of reality itself? But there was something else, something darker. With each step closer to the hidden world came resistance, forces, subtle but real, that seemed determined to stop her. Sudden illnesses, lost passages, betrayals from those she trusted, accidents that felt too precise seemed to be random, as though something did not want her to proceed. And yet, through it all, the presence of the man in white remained, not always visible, not always near, but always there, watching, guiding, testing. By the time Helena crossed into the borders of India, something had fundamentally shifted within her. The girl who had fled her marriage was gone. In her place stood someone else. A seeker transformed by the fire of the unknown, a mind sharpened by riddles, a spirit prepared for what came next. And what came next was the encounter that would change everything. For it was here, in the shadow of the Himalayas, at the edge of the world known to men, that the whispers would become words. The presence would become flesh. And the mysterious figure who had haunted her since childhood would finally reveal himself. But this revelation was only the beginning. For the true journey, the one that would shake the foundations of the spiritual world, had yet to begin. The first destination was Constantinople, a city unlike any other, a labyrinth where east and west collide, where minarets rise beside cathedrals, and whispers of ancient secrets linger between the stones. Here, Helena walked streets soaked in centuries of blood, faith, and forbidden knowledge. It was not merely a port, but a crossroads, where the sacred and the profane danced in shadow. In the bustling markets of Constantinople, beneath the scent of incense and salt, she hunted for more than spices or silk. Her eyes scanned for forgotten manuscripts, fragments of vanished knowledge. In a dim, dust-choked stall, she found her first prize, a crumbling volume, half Greek, half Arabic, filled with diagrams, symbols, and cryptic verses that spoke of the veil of reality and how it might be pierced. But the true treasures were not made of paper. They wore flesh. They had names and no names. It was here she first met the wandering mystics of the Sufi orders, men draped in white, who spoke in riddles, who danced, not for pleasure, but as a sacred act, a spiral toward the divine. They whispered of the hidden ones, the Akhwan al-Safa, the brothers of purity, custodians of secrets too dangerous for ordinary minds. From them, she learned that truth is not taught. It is caught in silence, in symbols, in the spaces between words. But Constantinople was only a doorway, a threshold. Beyond it lay Egypt. Cairo, the city of 1,000 minarets, but beneath its radiant skyline, another city pulsed. A hidden one, built not of stone, but of silence, oaths, and shadow. Here, Helena stepped deeper into the labyrinth. She found herself drawn to the fringes of society, into gatherings where veils were not merely cloth, but barriers between the seen and the unseen. In the ancient quarters of Cairo, she was introduced to members of clandestine Hermetic circles, men and women who claimed descent from the priesthood of Isis, guardians of rites older than history, remnants of a wisdom that once ruled beneath the pillars of the temple. She witnessed ceremonies whose origins whispered of Atlantis, of Lemuria, of civilizations buried not just by sand, but by time itself. Flames danced in geometric patterns, voices chanted in forgotten tongues, and for the first time, Helena felt the undeniable pulse of forces beyond the physical, forces that, when summoned, could shift the very fabric of reality. But not all who wear the robe of the mystic are saints. She soon discovered that the world of the occult is a double-edged sword. Alongside genuine seekers moved the charlatans, illusionists of the soul, merchants of vanity, selling false awakenings to the desperate and the greedy. And in that crucible of light and shadow, Helena learned a lesson that would shape her forever. That discernment is the first key to any true path. Disillusioned, yet undeterred, her journey spiraled once more toward Greece. Athens, a city whose stones still hummed with the echoes of forgotten chants, where philosophy was once indistinguishable from magic, and where the veil between mind and cosmos grew thin. Here, Helena sought the forgotten bridge between the logos and the mysteries, between the cold reason of the philosophers and the fiery ecstasy of the initiate. She sat with monks whose lineage traced back to the Orphic rites, guardians of the last embers of Hellenic esotericism. They spoke of the music of the spheres, of the harmony of the soul, of the descent of spirit into matter, and the long pilgrimage back to the source. Some whispered of Atlantis, not as myth but as memory, a warning and a promise that civilizations rise and fall, but the eternal flame survives. In sacred groves, in forgotten caves, Helena meditated on glyphs, symbols, and mantras designed to open the inner senses, and slowly, the world began to change. Or perhaps, she began to truly see it, as it had always been. But even in Greece, even among the ruins of wisdom, the presence lingered, watching, guiding, testing. Yet, the path was not yet complete. The road pulled her westward, toward France, and then England, centers of power, not merely political, but occult. Beneath the polished surface of European society, in salons hidden behind velvet curtains, and libraries whose books never appeared in public catalogs, she found another world, a world where scholars debated not politics, but alchemy, transmutation, the philosopher's stone, where mediums channeled voices from the beyond, where men in tailored suits spoke in hushed voices about the reconstruction of the temple, not in Jerusalem, but within the human soul. She met alchemists still chasing the legendary tinctures, the red and white stones, Kabbalists, piecing together the shattered vessels of creation, mesmerists, attempting to unlock the magnetic currents of the ether. And yet, despite the knowledge, despite the spectacle, something was missing. Their magic was clever, intellectual, sometimes powerful, but incomplete. It was a puzzle, missing its central piece. Helena realized that what she sought was not here, not in books, not in theories, not in the hands of those who merely played at the edges of the mystery. She sought the source, the wellspring, the original fire that could not be taught, but only transmitted. And always, in moments of deepest doubt, the presence returned, sometimes as a whisper, sometimes as a vision, a tall figure clothed in white, eyes like burning coals, reminding her, not here, not yet, keep moving. And so, with each port, each border crossed, each ritual witnessed, she grew less a traveler of lands, and more, a traveler of worlds. What was she chasing? Knowledge, power, freedom? Or was it something even more elusive, more dangerous, more sacred? The answer lay east, always east, toward the Himalayas, toward the last refuge of the masters, toward the secret heart of the world. And so it is, between the veils of the east, where the earth seems to rise and kiss the heavens, that he appears. A man, tall beyond the ordinary, robed in pristine white, a turban crowning his head, and eyes that seemed not to look at her, but through her, beyond her, into layers of her being she herself did not yet know existed. Before a single word escapes her lips, he speaks. Helena Petrovna. He calls her as though he has always known, as though her name, her soul, her destiny, were written in the invisible threads of the cosmos itself. This was the presence that had followed her, whispered to her, protected her, tested her, since childhood. The tall man, the man in white, the guardian from her dreams, now standing, utterly real, in flesh, and yet, more than flesh. She would later come to know him as Mahatma Morya, but this was no gentle reunion, no embrace, no comfort, no soothing words of welcome. The gaze, alone, was an initiation. In that instant, 1,000 lifetimes seemed to unfold, her mind fractured under the pressure of something it was never designed to hold, and yet, something within her refused to break. A deeper self, a forgotten self, rose, as if summoned to meet the gaze of the impossible. What followed was not a conversation, but a transmission, a silence heavier than any sound, a silence that pressed against her, filling every corner of her mind, revealing, stripping away all illusions. She saw, for the first time, the machinery behind reality, the patterns, the energies, the currents that move unseen, shaping nations, shaping destinies, shaping souls. He showed her, not with words, but with presence, that the world of matter is a shadow, that the visible is merely the echo of the invisible. She felt the pulse of the universe as a living intelligence. She felt the weight of karma, not as punishment, but as balance, precision, an architecture of perfect justice, beyond human comprehension. And she realized that humanity blindly stumbles, trapped in illusions, prisoners of senses, oblivious to the greater game unfolding beyond the veils. But this was only the threshold. The master did not offer comfort. He offered challenge. His message was clear, not through speech, but through an undeniable knowing that flooded her being. The path is suffering. The path is sacrifice. The path is death. Of all that is false within you, there is no other way. Test after test, vision after vision, he shattered her assumptions, her desires, her attachments, until there was nothing left but the question, are you willing to become the instrument of something far greater than yourself? She was shown glimpses of her mission, not in detail, but in essence, that her life would not be hers anymore, that forces, ancient, vast, and merciless in their precision, had plans in which she was a piece, a necessary piece, but only if she chose, and choice was everything. Because the path is never forced. It is, and has always been, an offering, one that demands everything in exchange for nothing the world considers valuable. He warned her, without words, but with absolute clarity. If you accept, you will be broken. You will be ridiculed, hunted, betrayed. You will walk among men, but never be one of them. Your comforts, your safety, your reputation, your very sense of self will be burned to forge something indestructible, the diamond soul. And then the most unbearable silence of all. No commands, no promises, only the gaze waiting. Helena trembled not with fear, but with the weight of knowing, the terrible knowing that from this moment there was no turning back. And she answered, not with words, but with the simple act of not turning away. In that the bond was sealed. The master then spoke for the first time in words. The work has not yet begun. What you have seen is but the edge. Prepare. You must go further, higher, deeper. When the time comes, we will call. And just as he had appeared, he was gone. No farewell, no explanation. Only the echo of a presence burned into every fiber of her being. Left alone, beneath the shadow of mountains that pierced the heavens, Helena realized that her entire life until this moment had been nothing but the prelude. The real journey was just beginning. She had touched the fringes of the Great Brotherhood, the custodians of the hidden laws, the guardians of humanity's forgotten potential. And now, her task was to survive, to prepare, to become the bridge between East and West, between the visible and the invisible, between the profane and the sacred. But how, where, when? That one was still veiled, because the path reveals itself only one step at a time, only when the seeker is ready to bear its unbearable light. And so, with nothing but a soul transformed, Helena descended from the mountains, no longer the same woman who had climbed them. She would wander still, learn still, be tested still, but the compass had been set, and the unseen hand that had guided her since childhood was now undeniable. The masters were real, the path was real, and her life would never belong to her, ever again. The encounter was not a blessing, it was a sacred contract, signed and not with ink, but with will, with sacrifice, with fire. From that moment forward, there was no way back, no home, no refuge, no illusion left to crawl into, only the path, the inexorable, merciless, magnificent path. When Helena reappears, years later, stepping once again into the world of men, she is no longer the same young Russian woman who vanished without a trace. What returned was something, or someone, entirely different. Her eyes no longer looked outward in search of answers. They carried answers. Her voice no longer asked, it declared. Her presence no longer sought permission, it imposed a different kind of gravity, as if reality itself bent slightly around her. Gone was the girl trapped in the suffocating cage of 19th century conventions. Gone was the naive seeker, fleeing a marriage, a family, a society that could not hold her soul. In her place stood a vessel, a carrier of codes, of keys, of knowledge, that the Western mind had neither the language nor the courage to comprehend. She no longer belonged to Russia, nor to any nation, nor to any faith, nor even to herself. She belonged to the work. What seemed to others a disappearance was, in truth, a birth. The birthing of the woman who, in a few short years, would shake the pillars of science, of religion, of philosophy, and of everything the West believed to be real. Her body bore the marks of travel, of hardship, of wandering through deserts, mountains, jungles, temples, libraries hidden beneath sands, scrolls locked away behind monastery walls, conversations whispered in languages, long forgotten by the world. But it was her mind, her spirit, that bore the true scars and the true treasures. She had seen things for which there are no words in any language, touched realities that fracture the mind of the unprepared, faced the terrifying majesty of forces that operate behind the thin veil we call reality, and survived. But survival was not the point. Transformation was the death of the ordinary self and the birth of the adept in the making. With her return, she brought more than knowledge. She carried a current, an invisible frequency, a transmission that would ripple through time and space far beyond her own lifetime. But with the gift came the weight. She now carried the awareness that humanity walks blind, that empires rise and fall, oblivious to the forces that move them, that religions fight over fragments, while the whole lies hidden, waiting, watching, through the eyes of the few who dare to truly see. And she understood, perhaps more than ever, why the path is not for the many, why it demands not just intellect, not just curiosity, but the complete annihilation of everything false within. She had stood before the masters. She had felt the crushing weight of the real, and she had been told, without words, that her life was no longer hers. It belonged to a task so vast, so ancient that the mind can only grasp its outer edges, a task to ignite a fire in the West, a fire of remembrance, of awakening, of revolt against the tyranny of ignorance. But how? How does one transmit the infinite into words? How does one teach the unspeakable to minds conditioned to shadows? She knew it would not be through sermons, nor through rituals, nor through the comfort of promises and of salvation. The West had enough of those illusions. It would be through disruption, through challenge, through forcing the sleeping to open their eyes, even if it blinded them at first. And so the blueprint began to form, a synthesis of East and West, of science and mysticism, of the ancient and the modern. She would speak, not as a preacher, but as a rebel of the spirit, not offering comfort, but confrontation, not escape, but responsibility. Because the hidden laws of the universe do not care for belief, for comfort, or for tradition. They operate, whether we know them or not, whether we accept them or not. And now, it was her role to lift the corner of that veil. But the cost would be everything: her reputation, her safety, her very identity. She knew she would be called a fraud, a liar, a witch, a madwoman. She would be hunted by the very societies she sought to awaken, betrayed by those who claimed to be allies, misunderstood by those she came to serve. And still, the answer was yes. Because when the soul signs that sacred contract with the invisible, the self no longer negotiates with fear. The calling was irrevocable. The wheel had turned, and nothing could stop what was set into motion. And so, Helena Petrovna Blavatsky stepped back into the world, no longer as a fugitive, but as a force that would soon ignite a storm that the world still has not fully understood. But who were they, really, these so-called masters? Where does the myth truly begin? And where does the truth quietly rest, hidden beneath the layers of time, of doubt, of belief and disbelief? Were they men of flesh and blood walking in secret among us? Were they disembodied consciousnesses watching from beyond the veil? Or were they something even more, something unspeakable, incomprehensible to the linear mind? Perhaps they are echoes of an intelligence so ancient, so vast, that it does not belong to any one world, or time, or form. An intelligence that has always been here, observing, whispering, nudging, watching the rise and fall of civilizations, the birth and death of stars, the unfolding of destinies, both personal and planetary. And yet, for all her revelations, for all her testimonies, even Helena never fully explained who or what the masters truly are. Perhaps because some truths cannot be explained, only encountered, only experienced, only lived. And maybe that was the point all along, to lead us not into answers, but into the questions that burn, that unsettle, that dissolve the prison walls of certainty. Because if such beings exist, if there are intelligences who guide, who guard, who shape the invisible architecture of human evolution, then the real question is not about them. The real question is about us, about you. If Helena was called, if she heard the whisper behind the veil, the magnetic pull of something far greater than herself, then who's to say that this calling, this very frequency, isn't echoing right now inside you? A thought, an intuition, a dream, a strange coincidence that refuses to be dismissed. Have you felt it? That subtle electric tension just behind reality's fabric, as if something or someone is watching, waiting, whispering, "Wake up." Because the truth, the terrifying and liberating truth, is that the path never truly belonged to Helena, nor to the chosen few, nor to the keepers of any secret lineage. It belongs to anyone courageous enough to answer. But beware, the path does not offer safety, nor comfort, nor the soft lies of a world addicted to forgetting. It offers only truth, and truth will demand everything. The question is, are you listening? Can you hear it? In the silence between thoughts, in the space between breaths, in the haunting feeling that this world, this life, cannot be all there is. That nagging suspicion that behind the ordinary pulses the extraordinary, behind the visible hides the invisible, behind the illusion waits the real. The same whisper that called her and calls now, not with words, not with promises, but with an ache, a magnetic, unbearable ache for meaning, for truth, for remembering who and what you really are. Helena answered. At 17, she walked away from everything, from certainty, from safety, from the known, into the unknown. She stepped into the mystery and let it consume her. And now, centuries later, her story is not just history. It's a mirror held up to you. What do you see, staring back from its depths? A spectator of mysteries, or a participant in the great work that still unfolds? Because perhaps the real secret, the one no book, no doctrine, no master can ever teach, is simply this: the masters have always been watching. The question is not whether they are real. The question is whether you are ready to become real. The choice has never left their hands, it has always been in yours. So listen closely now. Can you hear it? That whisper behind the veil? It calls still. And maybe, just maybe, it calls in you. If this mystery touched something inside you, don't ignore the calling. Subscribe now, turn on the bell, because this is only the first key. There are other gates, other secrets, and you are about to cross them. Leave a comment. Tell me, do you believe this journey was guided by chance, or is there no such thing as coincidence? Like, share, and get ready. Because Blavatsky's path is far deeper and far more dangerous than anyone ever imagined.